Welcome to Bleach Revisited. I am Karakura Gold, your host of this series in which we will be reading every single chapter of the Bleach manga, providing critical analysis of the art and narrative, as well as personal response to each of these chapters. We'll also be discussing how the chapter itself connects to the rest of the series as a whole. As usual, we begin these videos with a reading of the chapter that we are currently discussing for the episode. This is Chapter 110, The Dark Side of the Universe. Bleach, Chapter 110, The Dark Side of the Universe. He cut me. He heard the bells. It's been a while. That's it then. Oh, disappointing. No! 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 I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I can't die now. I can't die yet. Get up. Move. Gotta stop the blood. Let me fight again. I have to save Rukia. Do you want to fight? Do you want to win? Or do you want to live? Which is it? I want to win. I can't hear you. Fighting for its own sake is meaningless. Survival in itself is meaningless. I want to win. I want to win! Very well. Then I'll take you there. Where are we? What are you doing? I don't want to fall again, okay? There's no chance of that. That only happened because the balance of this inner world was lost when you became a hollow. It's different now. Look, even after a fight that fierce, your inner world is stable. Hold on. Then this weird up, down, left, right thing is normal? It seems you've grown a bit stronger. Fine. Just ignore me. Stand up, Ichigo. Whoa! Whoa! Hey, that's dangerous. What kind of person throws a naked sword? Hold on to it. It's your sword. Huh? But this isn't you. It's an Asauchi, a nameless Zanpakuto, for soul reapers who aren't worthy of the 13 court guard companies. But my Zanpakuto's name is Zangetsu. The Zangetsu you speak of? Is this it? The one your enemy broke earlier? I can't give it to you. What? What are you doing? Move. Huh? What the? A white Shihakusho? A Shihakusho is a Soul Reaper uniform. What the heck are you? What do you mean, partner? I want to see if you're worthy of possessing me. If you want me back, you'll have to take me from yourself. This time, your enemy is you. The Fourth Company General Relief Station has been busy ever since the Ryoka problem started. The gentlemen of the 11th Company in particular have been hard to handle. On top of everything, I received a request from the 8th Company to admit a Ryoka. We could barely manage as it is, and now I have to remit a Ryoka? I wish they'd give me a break. First of all, I don't understand the purpose of treating a defeated Ryoka. Captain Kyoraku is always chasing girls, wearing gaudy clothes, and is sleeping while everyone else is working. I don't know how someone like him ever got to be a captain, but I'd like to express my great respect for him. That is it for Bleach Chapter 110. The chapter title, which I cannot remember. You know, this is going to be a common element. Dark Side of the Universe. It's a pretty easy title to remember, especially considering how significant this chapter is. But speaking of significance, let's actually talk about this, and let's start with these phenomenal first panels. Oh, geez. Love the way that this chapter starts, especially with this first panel that's like top to bottom that we get, even if you're just looking at down the page, like I love the way the sequence of this flows, but especially this upper shot, and then we get the lower of Ichigo, and it's zoomed in not too dramatically, but just enough to feel uncomfortable compared to kind of the top panel. And I love that there's this sort of like really like uncomfortable, like it's almost like whenever you get hit and you feel like that like pulse of pain, I suppose. That doubling over, that feeling like your guts are coming out, because certainly that's what Ichigo's feeling here, and I think that's really effectively done because, again, Kubo likes to often use multiple panels to depict a character in their entire body across the multiple panels, their entire pose across the multiple panels, because that's something that's visually been set up within the visual language of Bleach, because we're used to that. At first glance, that's what this reads as, where it almost, if you zoom out, you almost immediately read the top panel as being connected to the second panel as a single piece, but then that second panel being just zoomed in enough to kind of add significance to the fall that Ichigo's having, really sells like the pain of this moment. His expression is fantastic, just like absolute, like shock and suffering, as Zangetsu yet again falls apart in his hands. And here we have, Kenpachi just, again, I love this kind of sunken eyes here on Kenpachi. It's like, he looks down upon Ichigo, that he's almost got this sullen look about him. He's like, oh, well, how disappointing, right? He caught me here at the Bills. It's been a while since anyone's even done that, right? But alas, Ichigo has not been able to stand up. And here we do see Ichigo with the shattered blade, as this isn't the first time that Ichigo has fought a commander even, and a captain has broken his Zanpakuto. So once again, Ichigo finds himself coming up short, not being able to save Rukia, right? And I definitely think this moment is meant to mirror the moment that we had before with Byakuya, right? And Ichigo being unable to really stand up, and him calling out, and wanting to get up, wanting to fight desperately. And I love, Kenpachi lays down the edge of his sword and scrapes it up against the ground as he pulls it up and whips it over his shoulder. And I absolutely love the effect of turning this page here. This is probably one of my favorite moments in this volume, is Kenpachi whips the sword over his shoulder, and then you turn page into Zangetsu just being there in the exact same image. Like, this moment of Zangetsu striding towards Ichigo, and it's clear only Ichigo can see, old man Zangetsu here, right? As he strides forward, and as I try to zoom in, and my mouse does this instead. The up scroll on my mouse hates me. It often clicks in more than it does a up scroll. And I love the shock that we have here Ichigo as he sees old man Zangetsu, and as we get this really great moment of Ichigo kind of clinging in the darkness of Zangetsu's cloak, kind of reaching out almost to envelop Ichigo, right, as he asks him if he wants to fight. And yeah, like I love like time is almost stopped here. Like we still see the arc of like this swing of Kenpachi's blade. So this is all just happening in a frozen moment, like this bird that's in the sky. Nevertheless, it feels like this bird is like stuck in the sky and not actually moving. I don't think it was pictured earlier. Anyway, Ichigo expresses that he wants to win, and Zangetsu like really wants to like get this affirmation from Ichigo, right? That Ichigo's going to go to any length. And Zangetsu takes him into his inner world, right? And envelops him in the shadow of his cloak. And they absolutely just disappear, like from reality. I love the way that Ichigo is depicted here as he's like being kind of transported. The white, like the shock of his hair is being slung back even to his soul is being transmuted elsewhere. And he awakens in what we know to be his inner world, right? Of these kind of large buildings sideways. Ichigo remembers falling down them whenever he was training with Kisuke, right? So he tries to get his balance. And Zangetsu expresses kind of an important thing here. And this is, we always get old man Zangetsu kind of being able to not have to really worry about the balance of the world, whereas Ichigo constantly has. So, this is like this aspect of him that's comfortable in this inner space, right? But before it lost its balance because Ichigo became a hollow. I think this is pretty significant because this hard confirms, like, yes, Ichigo not only died, but if there was any speculation beforehand about whenever Ichigo disappeared and then reappeared elsewhere, he legitimately became a hollow. Like, that's what happened with the Shattered Shaft. That like Ichigo became a hollow and then was still able to shatter his mask and hold on to his humanity and exist, I guess independent of all of that with, essentially still kind of keep control of himself. So, he expresses like, well, even after you had that fight that you just had, your inner world's still stable. So this isn't as huge as an upset within his soul as becoming a hollow, which is probably pretty serious. I mean, like we saw like how the effects of hollification destroyed all the structure and balance of Ichigo's inner world, and it was only upon grasping his Shinigami powers that he was able to cling to an identity, beyond that he was able to kind of hold on to who he was and not let the hollow take over. Of course, like he asks, like, if this inverted world's normal, and old man just ignores him, and tosses him a sword. And it's notable that this is just a kind of generic looking sword. Ichigo calls that out, of course. Like he's, trying to juggle it around. It's supposed to be a comedic moment, and he's like, "Who throws somebody a naked sword, right?" As he just sort of materializes this sword out of thin air. But he expresses, like that's your sword. It's an Asauchi, and we learn a little bit about, Zanpakuto that Shinigami have. They have these nameless Zanpakuto, these Asauchi, and it's what they use whenever they're not worthy of even being in the 13 court guard company. So, before you even join the Gotei 13, maybe whenever you're in training, you just have one of these Asauchi, and if you never make it, that's just you have your nameless garbage sword. And of course, Ichigo tries to refute this. He knows his sword. His sword is Zangetsu. And to this, old man Zangetsu expresses like, "Oh, is this it? the one that broke. And I love that he glances down at it and he kind of, has this pained expression, because if he truly is this sword, Ichigo has yet again seen him shattered, has not really truly like fought beside him as he's ran and all of that. And so ergo this trial happens, right, where he says, I can't give this to you. He throws the sword seemingly off the side of the building. And here we have the introduction of another character, a character that is a fan favorite of many, and of course you could probably quickly figure why, but of course, you notice the white Shuhakusho, right, the inverted colors of a Shinigami, and I like this little like spin and then land as he grabs Zangetsu. Like, of course, Ichigo's absolute shock whenever he comes here. Like, the expression Ichigo has as he starts to sweat and he's wondering who this could be. And I love the page turn into seeing this kind of inverted Ichigo, right? It is absolutely just Ichigo, but with the inverted colors of what a Shinigami would wear. So instead of the black on like white detail, it is white on black. And his eyes, the sclera in his eyes, the whites of his eyes, they're all black, as he expresses, what do you mean, partner? Right? Very striking visuals. That's why I say, this character is one that is a fan favorite, not just because it's Ichigo, but because it's this anti Ichigo. Typically, this character will get referred to as white, just like the color white. But I remember whenever the series came out, there was a lot of speculation on this character. A lot of people would call him anti-Ichigo, Ichigo with like an exclamation sign before the name, right? You would get some hollow Ichigo because it gets mentioned earlier, right? That ever since the sort of hollow battle, that was what really gave a lot of, just like really caused a lot of problems with an Ichigo soul. And so some people speculate this is some hollow aspect of Ichigo, so often he would get referred to as Hollow Ichigo, but not to be confused with Ichigo actually manifesting as a Hollow as he did within the series, so perhaps some internal Hollow aspect. My favorite name that has been landed on is the Japanese word for white, Shiro, right? Shirosaki, I think, is a cute one. Like Kurosaki, but Shirosaki. Kuro means black, by the way. I think that is a cute kind of play on words of Ichigo's last name and this character being white. But within the manga, or at least within, I'm pretty sure Kubo refers to this character as white, and in other other stuff that refers to this character refers to him as white before we ever get any sort of name. So, yeah, here, of course, he just says, like, this is you. You're fighting yourself. So it's this mirror of Ichigo, this sort of this other version. I love the reflection of his face, that he's kind of got like almost a smirk here, but a more serious kind of face in the reflection of Zangetsu. It's pretty interesting. But the idea that you'll have to fight yourself to see if you're worthy of possessing this sword that's a manifestation of your own power, right? And yeah, I think that's kind of interesting stuff, right? That Ichigo then has to fight this kind of dark version of himself, his mirror internal self. And I mean, it's common, it's fairly common that like in shonen, a lot of protagonists have some sort of dark internal kind of version of themselves. They have some sort of dark side or some sort of version that they can call forth of themselves. I think about Yu-Gi-Oh, right? And the Pharaoh is like this alter ego for Yugi, right? This isn't quite the same thing, but it's interesting nevertheless. I think one thing that people will sometimes criticize, and I don't think it's really a fair criticism, people will criticize Bleach for having characters that look like Ichigo or that have similar designs, right? And so the criticism you'll see here is like, oh, well, you just drew Ichigo again, right? Same sort of thing with Kon. kind of, and this at this point we've had Ichigo's design essentially used for 3 characters. Now, one was possessed by Ichigo, and he had vastly different expressions. And I think the same can really be said here of White as well. Um, I don't really like, as much as Ichigo and White are meant to be like mirrors of one another. I've always felt that White kind of felt very distinct. Ooh, kind of shuddered that word out of myself the first time I said it. I always felt that White looked distinct from Ichigo, and it's not just the eyes, but just in general. It might be the furrowed brow ultimately. That White has this sort of like almost playful expression, this sort of haunting expression about him, whereas Ichigo always has the knotted up sort of brow. Perhaps that's ultimately the deciding factor for me. Also, we get a little bit different shading on White's face a lot of the time. Nevertheless, I will probably be referring to the character as White from here on, just to kind of keep it clear who I'm talking about, because, you can come up with 1,001 names for this person, and saying, like, the other Ichigo all the time is going to be weird, so I'll just be calling this character White for the time being. Just as I'll refer to Old Man Zangetsu to help differentiate from the sword itself, Zangetsu, because I might be talking about one or the other. You can see how this starts to get to be a little bit of a conundrum whenever you have, multiple things you could be referring to in the same page, multiple characters or things that all sort of share a name here and there, right? It's a little bit of a workaround. I have to make sure that I'm very clear about what I'm talking about. But nevertheless, we do have White show up here, and we do have the promise of a fight within a fight. So here, Ichigo has been kind of pulled away from the world, similar in the way that Ichigo sort of disappeared during his battle with Urahara, right? Sort of the way that he was pulled into his internal realm. And I think that is neat. Of course, we get more of this little report, and I love the scratched out parts here, as he's trying to be a little bit more like serious. Calls out Captain Kyoraku for chasing girls and wearing gaudy clothes and sleeping all the time. I don't know how he got to be a captain. I always have a laugh at that sort of thing. What the third seats think of their higher ups. But yeah, ultimately, kind of to speak towards White, I think like immediately the eyes being designed the way that they are, having the kind of all black eyes is meant to reflect something sort of ghastly or demonic. White is also given really pale skin in the anime, and generally kind of reads as paler than Ichigo as well. But yeah, I think the idea being that he's this inversion of Ichigo, that he is this almost reversal of Ichigo in a lot of ways, and we'll see just how much that ends up being the case, how much White ends up being kind of this antithesis to Ichigo, and what he truly is, if he's just this opponent that's born solely for this fight, or what the case may be to come. But nevertheless, there's this entity within Ichigo that Ichigo must battle, that is this sort of whiteness that feels at odds with the all black nature of his Zanpakuto and his Old Man Zangetsu as well, right? And even at odds with the kind of all black of the Shihaku show. So he's like this opposite figure to even the Shinigami and the power that he has through being a Shinigami. Yeah, so neat stuff. It's interesting to kind of get this new character. The art, of course, I think is phenomenal in this chapter. Lots of really good expressions from Ichigo. I love a lot of these panels. Really sells his like suffering and desperation. To come back, and of course, Old Man Zangetsu looking fantastic, looking very ethereal and otherworldly. I think I can't gush enough about like that transition there. Like just him flickering into existence with the page turn. I haven't read like that feels like you could do that with super speed kind of in a manga, but I don't know. I haven't read another manga that's had that effective of like just like a like jaw dropping page turn moment in a long time. This is really some top notch stuff. Very very efficient. Yeah, I really love Ichigo's expression in this middle panel here. The I can't die yet panel. Um, like him trying to get up and his chest just splurting with blood. He's really working it. Um, yeah, and interestingly enough, here we have the all kind of black. We had the black used for the paneling around the title in the previous like one back, just like 109, I'm pretty sure. Maybe even two back, but then I mentioned that it was used kind of inconsistently because usually the black is used to denote a flashback or some sort of internalization, and it was used there because of it's a title page, and here because it's a title page. But you could probably read that all black being kind of a reference, perhaps, maybe, back to whenever Ichigo initially kind of had contact with Zangetsu, and every time that Zangetsu was there, we would get those intercuts of the black panel, like the the backgrounds, the background. Ooh, boy, words. Black backgrounds for each of the panels that Zangetsu was in, like the paneling background was black to denote this as being like a part of Ichigo's kind of internalization, that it wasn't Zangetsu literally physically being there. Um, and to a degree, I kind of wish that was also done here, but I think that the scene establishes, yeah, like Kenpachi's not reacting to Zangetsu whatsoever, so you can read it that way. And maybe the chapter titles having that black is maybe, and it's a bit of a stretch, most supposed to remind us of those kind of Zangetsu moments. I just wish there was maybe a little bit more there if that it was the case. But all in all, really like this chapter, and I really like what it introduces and sets up, and that of course, Ichigo's not going to win this fight against Saraki, and so instead, how is he going to proceed? He's going to have this kind of internal struggle of his own, and instead of him having an internal struggle on page, like in words back and forth, like we saw in the previous chapters, he's having like an actual literal internal struggle. I think it's really cool that gets depicted in the way that it does. And it serves for some of the more evocative sort of like ways that we can look at Bleach. That like now you have to wonder, like, does every character that has a Zenpakuto, do they have like these manifestations and these internalized battles? Like, is this an Ichigo only thing? It's really curious, and it opens up the world for a lot of questions and for us to speculate a lot, and it makes the world richer for it. So I think it's a very smart choice to decide to depict that internal battle and to return to Ichigo's internal world. And you have to wonder what the internal world of other characters might be like, yeah, it's curious. It's neat. It's inventive and interesting. Um, and yeah, I'm definitely here for it. So let's talk about spoilers for this one. Let's get into it. Of course, Dark Side of the Universe is almost certainly a reference to how Old Man Zangetsu is essentially taking Ichigo, using the powers of darkness to bring him into the shadow world that we know is hidden. Right? I know that we go into Ichigo's internal world and all of that, but like that power to envelop Ichigo in shadow and take him away, that is absolutely one of Yuhabuk's powers. Yeah. Of course, stopping the blood also ends up being a Quincy power that, he ends up utilizing. It's kind of interesting thinking about this, like the intersection of Quincy powers and Ichigo's like Shinigami powers and otherwise, right? Like exactly what he's making use out of. Now Ichigo mentions this up, down, left, right thing being normal, right? This sort of like everything being, inverted, the inverted world being a normal thing for Ichigo. And I think it's interesting because if the inverted world is normal for Ichigo, if Ichigo's internal world is normally inverted, then his Zangetsu, his actual Zangetsu spirit being an inversion of himself, makes sense. It's a reflection of his internal world, you know. I think that's kind of cool. And then that also the up, down, left, right thing, that sort of things being inverted, does come up sort of again with Hirako Shinji and his Shikai. So it's kind of interesting that Shinji is the one to make contact with Ichigo, and that they have a sort of resonance between the two of them, um, as visored, of course. So that's cute too. Um, I always kind of held that this Asuichi that he throws him is what Ichigo's basic ass Asuichi might look like. I mean, if he had a completely unsealed state, or completely sealed state, I guess, of Zangetsu, perhaps it would be closer to this. I know this is just meant to be an Asuichi, but still, I do like it. Um, I like here that old man Zangetsu's like, oh, is this the Zangetsu that you're talking about? Like this is Zangetsu as if separate from himself, and he even has this sort of uncomfortable look, and I feel like he has that look because the actual Zangetsu is manifesting itself, right? And he tosses it aside and decides to, flavor this encounter as Ichigo training with actual Zangetsu. And we do know that, yes, his sword is a manifestation of his Quincy powers as well as his hollow powers, but I think it's, his Shinigami powers, really. And that like that white kind of represents both, like all that Shinigami side of him, hollow, as well as truly like his Shinigami self, which is why it's the inversion, right? Because his Shinigami powers were born at the same time as his hollow powers, basically. That Ichigo's hollow powers are in fact visored powers, are as much like, an Arrancar's powers even. And I like that, Shiro, or White, is clad in that raiment. I also really like that here Zangetsu's cloth becomes longer and like ends up being kind of punctuated here, and I think that's also the case a little bit here. But that cloth is meant to sort of be representative of White, right? That it's his sort of binding. That the handle is more white and the blade is more old man Zangetsu at this point. Nevertheless, I mean they both contribute their powers to the blade, so it's like it's not right to say like, well, this is for sure, this is Zangetsu himself, and the old man is just an aspect of Yawok that's imprinted itself. It's just a reflection of his Quincy powers, because I think it's a little bit more than that. That like Yawok is both Ichigo's Quincy aspect as well as his Shinigami aspect, because it's the Shinigami aspect that lets them materialize in his inner world in the first place, I feel. And then White is both his Shinigami aspect and his hollow aspect, right? And while it's certainly like White is more reflective of what his actual sword may be, I don't know, his powers are an amalgamation of all of that, right? So as much as this is Zangetsu, the other character is Zangetsu as well. He's just another kind of divorced aspect of it. And at no point is Ichigo, like, until he really manages to meld all of them, he's not truly wielding, Zangetsu. And we come to learn that in the Thousand Year Blood War, right? That Ichigo hasn't truly kind of wielded his blade, that he's always been wielding some sort of perversion, that he hasn't really made himself a true Zanpakuto, because this has always been a manifestation, an externalization of his power through these other avenues, be they Quincy or Hollow. Um, it's interesting. Like, I wonder exactly how other people might break that down, because certainly, like, I thought about the mechanics of it. I've thought about, like, it's because it's certainly strange that whenever Ichigo comes out of the Shattered Shaft, whenever he forms, he makes Zangetsu, he draws Zangetsu. At first it's just the broken blade, but whenever he turns and then draws the hilt and he manifests it off of the hilt of the blade, he manifests the entire Zangetsu. And I've kind of always read that like not like him really releasing a Shikai off of a handle, and then if he were to seal it back, it would just be a handle, but more like him manifesting a new weapon with the help of his Quincy powers, really. Um, yeah, I don't know. Like that is as much a consecration of Reishi as it is an externalization of some aspect of his soul. That this white aspect was born in that moment, but just hadn't shown itself because the old man Zangetsu was always more powerful and more dominant because it had been there since Ichigo's birth. I mean, white to a degree had been, but yeah, it's curious, right? I mean, there's a lot there, and it's a lot to unpack and think about. And I've looked at the kind of like fan made stuff that sort of tries to unpack like exactly the sort of powers Ichigo's using at each point in the plot and how he uses them. Um, but it's interesting to think of Ichigo's powers because they are so much reflective of so many different things. But he's never had it like until the Thousand Year Blood War. He's never had a true Zanpakuto because it's always been a spiritual manifestation that he's made, if that makes sense. Because yeah, he's never had an Asuichi that he's turned into a Zanpakuto. Like that's just it, straight up. Like it's always been, either he was using this remnant of power from Rukia, which truly wasn't his, or he had manifested Zangetsu. And yeah, I like Quincy powers. Ultimately, you draw the reishi around you to manifest it into like a physical kind of form. I say physical form, a form to interact with others to become your weapon. Um, Shinigami powers are that you have your own sort of reiatsu that you externalize from yourself into a blade that you make external and you wield that way. You can kind of release it, and the Zanpakuto itself ends up kind of being a handheld hollow turned weapon. Interestingly enough, and that's because hollow powers are the type of powers where you're able to manifest your own reiatsu as a part of your Reiroku or whatever, I think, right? As your spiritual body itself, you're able to have your Reiatsu influence that. And so Ichigo's powers are always kind of born of those other elements, the Quincy and the Hollow elements more so than the Shinigami. Until, of course, Thousand Year Blood War and forward. It's curious. It's interesting. And like, how much is Ichigo actually using Shinigami powers at all before that point? You have to wonder, right? And I think the argument is that, very, very minorly. Like both of these, again, I think my argument is that both of these aspects, both Zangetsus, both Old Man Zangetsu and White, are both only able to manifest this way because of Ichigo's Shinigami powers. Otherwise, he would have been able to see both of them in his inner world one way or another before meeting Rukia, right? And he hadn't. I mean, he also didn't have any sort of major spiritual awakening before then, to be fair. But, we don't hear characters like, Uryu talking about seeing some sort of Quincy in their head, right? Just like none of the Hollow characters have a kind of an internalized sort of spirit in the same way that Ichigo does. And I think in order to have these sort of spirits that are exterior to your own self, you have to have a Shinigami power. Because Shinigami power is all about creating these kind of external spiritual beings out of your own Reiatsu. It's just that Ichigo's Reiatsu is Quincy Reiatsu and Hollow Reiatsu both. And that Hollow Reiatsu has always been there, but it's even able to manifest even more after Ichigo becomes a Hollow in the Shattered Shaft. So what I'm getting at is he's always had Quincy power and Hollow power dormant within him. Whenever he first awakens to Shinigami power, he's borrowing Rukia's power, and Zangetsu is technically there, but because Ichigo hasn't really actually made contact with his own Shinigami power, it's moot. After the event in the Shattered Shaft, Ichigo becomes a hollow. White's able to manifest, but White's only able to manifest in this physical form because one, it's not completely taking over Ichigo, and two, Ichigo is awakened to Shinigami power, and that Shinigami power allows him to make external manifestations, even if they are within his own soul, of both White and Old Man Zangetsu. And the reason why they both have such strength of personality and both individualistic natures is because White is this hollow entity that had existed beforehand. It's essentially the remnant Ryatsu of White, the Vaster Lord that was created by Aizen. And Yawok's able to have all that because of the Quincy power that was passed down through Ichigo, through Yhwach, or Yawok, whatever it is. Old Man Zangetsu essentially has the remnants of this Quincy power that was forever ago essentially gifted to humans through Yhwach, and so therefore it takes that form. Yeah, it's interesting that like there are both these aspects of this power that Ichigo has inherited. And, you know, it's interesting that the one power that Ichigo hasn't inherited was his Shinigami powers. Maybe he's inherited like his incredible Ryatsu from the Shiva line, or perhaps even the Kurosaki. Like that there's a conflagration there of two really great spiritual entities, but that he owes these two aspects. Well, I mean, the Quincy one, yes, he does owe to his mother, but you know, that he owes them more to these two kind of antagonistic beings. And it's interesting that these two antagonistic beings represent these two forces that ultimately are like working upon him one way or the other. And they'll end up being forces that Ichigo ends up fighting down the line, but also that the antagonistic forces ultimately of Kisuke and Aizen are the ones to shape Ichigo as well, and that Kisuke is the one to ensure that Ichigo's parents come together, and also that Ichigo goes to the Shattered Shaft, and Aizen was the one to ensure that that White got made. So it's interesting to see that like Ichigo's parentage and his powers will ultimately come from, you know, ultimately both Kisuke and Aizen. That they had so much of a hand in cultivating who Ichigo is. But yeah, that's always the way that I've kind of the ultimate conclusion that I've come for Ichigo's powers is that it is this amalgamation of these different things, and so it's unfair to say it's like one or the other. But I think it will tend to be a majority. So whenever it's Old Man Zangetsu, that's a majority of Ichigo's Quincy powers taking charge, and whenever it is White here, whenever it's like, you know, Shirosaki or you know, White Zangetsu, it is a manifestation of mostly his hollow powers. And until the two really merge into one, do they have a kind of combination of the both of them? And really, in 2000 until Thousand Year Blood War, he isn't truly wielding in balance his Shinigami powers at all. They're just a minor aspect that allows him to manifest these other things. So, yeah, it's weird, right? It's definitely strange because like I think it can be easy to kind of write it off one way or the other. Like, no, this is just his sword spirit, whatever, or this is just his internal hollow. And I don't think it's that simple. I think it's the way that I've kind of broken it down. That Shinigami powers allow these manifestations. Quincy powers allow you to use the reishi in the world around you, which Ichigo has been doing. I mean, whenever he fought Grand Fisher, that was, you know, a big aspect of it. That he took in all that energy from Grand Fisher's attack, which is pretty significant. But then also, you know, his hollow powers. That's a like kind of again the idea of Fullbring, or the idea of manifesting your own Ryatsu as a part of your being, manipulating that around you, and all of those together is what allows Ichigo to kind of fake having just Shinigami powers, which is interesting because he certainly does, but like to such a lesser degree and not in the traditional sense. And the reason why he's able to make a Zanpakuto out of thin air essentially is because he has all the other elements that other Shinigami essentially have to cheat in. Other Shinigami have to be given an Asauchi because that is a hollow that has been forced into the shape of a sword so that it can have a, a Shinigami essentially imprint their Reiatsu upon it. But Ichigo doesn't need that because he already has that hollow aspect himself to manifest externally, and to imprint upon, perhaps. So, yeah, it's neat, right? I hope that makes some sense. I hope that I didn't just ramble for like 20 minutes here and lose everybody like on the level of kind of where I'm talking about. I hope I also, for those of you that actually know what's going on, didn't just go, yeah, it's obvious, Garker Gold, and then just wrote me off for like the rest of this, and just had to kind of block me out. Of course, White saying partner, right? It's because he's Zangetsu. It's because he's an aspect of Zangetsu. It's because he's been, he's essentially like, hey, we're partners. And I do like this panel a lot. When I initially read this panel, because it shows White's mouth open, I initially read this as White saying, if you're worthy of possessing me, if you want me back, you'll have to take me from yourself. And then I was like, no, it's probably Old Man Zangetsu saying that, right? And so it's interesting that, here, normally I would usually give a manga a hard time for not making it clear who's speaking. But here, I like that it's ambiguous. At the end of the day, I think it's Old Man Zangetsu, and that he's essentially, being a little duplicitous. That, like, this isn't really, like, this is as much Ichigo's self as Old Man Zangetsu kind of is anyway. Like, they're just different echoes of his power one way or the other. But it is interesting that, Zangetsu's really saying, Old Man Zangetsu's saying, like, oh yeah, Zangetsu's me. This is just, I don't know, you. Right? Yeah, it's certainly curious. And I think to a degree, part of the reason for that is that Zangetsu wants to not so much deceive Ichigo as he's trying to cultivate Ichigo to be able to defeat Yuha. But we'll get into that when we get into that. That's like a long sort of headcanon. And that maybe will come up later whenever Ichigo's training for his Bankai. We'll get a little bit more into that. But nevertheless, this is a pretty heavy chapter for spoilers, obviously. This is a pretty heavy chapter to think about for aspects of Ichigo's soul that get introduced. And yeah, I am a fan of White. I think White is a really cool character. And I'm a big fan of Volume 13 and the Undead, because it does introduce White, and because it does contain this entire really cool battle, both between Ichigo and Saraki, but also between Ichigo and White. It's cool stuff. I'm absolutely here for it. What else? What else was I gonna say? Something about the undead. I was gonna make jokes like each one of these, where I'd be like, actually, the undead refers to, like this other aspect, this other thing. And I was going to joke in every episode, like I was going to try to expand the definition of the undead more and more. But I decided against it. Here, though, I do think that the undead, specifically like referring to Ichigo as a hollow, and then being risen from the dead, is certainly made significant, right? That this idea of Ichigo having come back darker, having come back as a hollow, is meant to reflect the undead aspect of Ichigo, and that's certainly what we see in White. So that's cool. Anyway, I was going to say the other thing that the undead could be referring to is we get that moment in 109, right, where they confirm Aizen's death, but we know that he's really alive, and so he's technically undead, huh? Anyway, I was thinking about joking, but I was like, eh. I am serious about the Ichigo stuff, though. I think that the undead is like a play on words between, maybe we're supposed to assume it means Saraki since he's on the cover, and then maybe it can be referenced to Ichigo having died and come back to as a Shinigami, but really truly it's that larger referral. And it has to do with all this hollow stuff, and we're finally seeing the sort of the consequences of that, so to speak, within this internal struggle. I think that's what's really significant. There's two battles here happening for Ichigo, but both of them are battles between the undead. And really, if you think about it, both White and Old Man Zangetsu are both aspects of characters that are essentially dead, right? Now, yes, Yuhabak is technically a slumber for 1,000 years or whatever, but White as the Hollow is absolutely dead. This is just some remnant of its Reiatsu that's imprinted upon Ichigo, and then it's taken this form now that Ichigo has basically become a Hollow. And then he has this internal kind of this internalization of that Hollow Reiatsu that's always been a part of him. So yeah, White gets to be undead too. Cool times, good times, great oldies. It's all great. Anyway, that's it for this one, folks. Thank you so much for following along. As always, please do give the video a like for doing this far. Subscribe, share this with your friends. Buy me a soda. Buy yourself a soda. And if you can see it in your heart, please do support on the Patreon. Everybody supporting on the Patreon right now is shown on screen. I want to give a big shout out to all the folks there who are supporting. Thank you very much. If you're curious about how to support, there is a link in the description for every episode. So I do appreciate it. That's all for this one, everybody. This has been Karakura Gold, reminding you that spirits are forever with you. Stay gold. What do you mean, partner? I want to see. Oh no, that's probably. Yeah. Shit.